Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of Tabletopped. We have one of our returning guests, a huge friend of the pod, Matt from Roleplay Chat. You know him, you love him, and guess what? He has designed a TTRPG. We're going to sit down and talk about it today. Matt, welcome back to Tabletopped.
Awesome. Thanks for having me, Nick. I love all the listeners too. The love is reciprocal. The listeners, the podcast host, everybody in Tabletop. I'm pleased to be back. It's always a great place to chat games. So thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's always great for me to be able to sit you down and take some of your time. But let's talk a little bit about the game. So it's called First Date Update. And you very kindly sent me sort of a draft of it so we could talk through it. You have right in the title here on the title page, like not made with AI. Love that. But can you tell me a little bit about, because this game is very unique. It's not a D20 system. It's not powered by the apocalypse. It's not a pre-existing system. So like, what was the genesis of this game, and like what sort of is it for our listeners, just to level set?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I guess the elevator pitch or the premise is that you've gone on a first date and now you're being ghosted. You thought the date went well, and for some reason, the person that you went on that date with is not answering your texts. So you engage the help of your nosy mutual friends to try to figure out what happened. And the game kind of plays out in a series of role play scenes where you interact with one another. Usually some kind of silly situations ensue, and there's a little bit of laughing, there's a little bit of crying, there's a little bit of loving, there's a little bit of hating, the kind of the mix in between, and ultimately you get to find out, will you get a second date with the person that's ghosting you. So it's kind of like this silly, GM-less, no prep role-playing game that you can kind of just pull out, play, tell a funny story about people looking for connection. And whether you find it or not is kind of besides the point. The whole point is to tell a fun story about people and their relationships with one another.
Yeah, and that's a great elevator pitch, and it pretty much runs through everything. Like you said, there are sort of three roles that people can take on, which is the person who was on the date and is being ghosted, the mutual friends, and the ghoster. And you sort of have a little bit of rule sets for each of them, because there's like different stages of the game. There's, I think, three. There's the initial stage, which is mostly the mutual friends and the person who went on the date. And then there's the second stage, which is sort of the mutual friends and the ghoster, and then the third stage, which is like everyone together kind of hashing out whether or not there's gonna be a next date, essentially.
Yeah,
can you tell me a little bit about the process around like how you developed this sort of pipeline almost? Because like I said earlier, it's not a classic system where you build a character sheet and you're using that and you're playing that through consecutive sessions. It's more like you have sort of a path, and you're building something on the fly and then seeing where it goes, essentially.
Yeah. It's very much been inspired by a game called Fiasco. I'm not sure if you've played Fiasco before.
Yeah, I have. It's great.
So it's very much inspired by Fiasco. I think of it kind of as this like brainchild of if Fiasco and 10 Candles had a baby, and that baby was really into like cheesy romance TV, like a reality TV. To me, that's what First Date Update is kind of all about. And the design intention here was really kind of born from this place of being this, middle-aged 30-something-year-old man. I'm married, I have kids, and whenever I see people on dating apps expressing their frustration, I have friends who are still single, having a hard time connecting with people. I always feel a little bad for them, but also super interested. I'm like, oh man, I would hate to be in the dating scene right now, but like, there's got to be a lot of fun stories. There's got to be a lot of like silly things going on. So that's kind of what First Date Update is. It's let's tell some exaggerated stories about first dates, have some fun with it. And like you said, yeah, it's not your traditional role-playing game where you're developing a character and you're leveling up and you're picking skills and you're you have like a build, Dungeons and Dragons, Pathfinder, Daggerheart, all these games that are like these long-form role-playing games. First Aid Update is kind of the opposite of that. It's very much this short form, no prep, no game master game, almost like a structure for improvisational roleplay. Like that's more what it is. Of course, there's some simple mechanics, there's some coin flips, and there's some things like this to kind of help direct the narrative. But at the end of the day, the purpose of playing this game is really to tell stories. Far more than in Dungeons and Dragons, for instance, where there's you can tell stories, but also you're going after the big bad, or you're going to find the treasure of somebody or what have you. So I don't know if that answers your question, Nick, but
no, it totally does. And it kind of leads me into one of the things I wanted to talk to you about, which was like, as a designer, how you approached creating the feel of the game that you wanted. Because so for our listeners who haven't read through the book, it has these kind of, like I said, these 3 roles that people have, and they all kind of feel and have specific kind of roles to play within the story. So you have the first, the dater, I guess I'll call the first player.
In the game, they're called the initiator. They're the person
who
yes,
that's
tried
great.
to
Thank
get
you.
that they got the first date, now they're trying for the second.
Right. And the role there at the beginning is really like laying down the framework that everyone is going to be playing in. So like in the first stage, you're talking to these mutual friends and they're basically asking, what happened? How was the date? Where did you go? And you say like, oh, we went to the amusement park. There was the example in the book is like, I accidentally like kicked her on the roller coaster, and like I like kicked her in the butt on accident, and I felt really embarrassed, but I don't know if she actually like felt it or not or whatever, like, or was mad at me. I'm hoping that that's not the thing that went wrong. I really loved the date, and basically set the parameters so that then when the mutuals go to the other person and they tell their side of the date, that you then have this kind of like cross comparison that you then play in the third section, which is everyone talking about whether or not there should be another date, essentially. Would you disagree with my characterization of any of those roles?
No, that is kind of the 3 different roles. And I think, one of the big challenges in these GM-less games, I find, is that sometimes a story can be hard to kickstart because nobody is the de facto arbiter of the narrative or of the world or of the rules. Yeah. So when I created First Aid Update, my intention was not there couldn't, I did not want there to be a game master because I wanted it to be simple, but I still wanted each role to kind of have a responsibility within the context of telling the story. Yeah. So by separating out these like asynchronous responsibilities within the characteristics of the roles, it makes it clear, like the person who is the initiator, they're the one that's going to set the stage. They're going to establish the canonical elements of where the date was and maybe some of the embarrassing moments that happened, whether it was happy or playful or silly or things like this. So they're going to establish that, and then everybody else has to follow suit with them because that's the responsibility of the initiator. Yeah. Whereas the mutuals kind of get to influence the perception and kind of manipulate the story a little bit because they play this in between, right? Between the ghost and the initiator. So by asking specific questions or pressing certain issues, they get to kind of accentuate elements of what's being said. And I thought that was important too, because a good story has to have these items that are kind of the climactic moments of your narrative. So the mutuals kind of have that responsibility. Same with like sort of setting the pace, right? They can ask questions fast, they can slow things down, they can peek behind the curtain, stuff like that. And then the ghost is kind of your bad guy. Of course, that's not always going to be the case, but by de facto, the ghost is the person who is ignoring the initiator. There must have been a reason, and maybe it was a good reason, but it's kind of fun to play in a little bit that adversarial role as being the person who's ghosting the initiator. So while there isn't a game master, I tried my best to make sure that each role had very specific things that they were responsible for. That doesn't mean they can't dabble in and out. You know, the game isn't really all that complicated. So there's a beauty in that simplicity. But that was kind of the design choice in making these three roles to splice up not having a game master, basically.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's like some cool things in here that you can kind of like home table sort of like rule on certain things. Like there's a thing in the beginning around in the first section where the initiator is developing the parameters for the game that's going to be going forward. There's a note that you put in there that like the ghost is not there. You know what I mean? Like they cannot kind of add or anything to it. But I was thinking like, oh, wouldn't it be a fun like home rule if like the ghost had to like leave the room? You know what I mean? To like not hear that side of the story. And then when they come back in, you know, you maybe on note cards, you write down some of the core things like it was at an amusement park and this is the thing. And then you have them do their side of it too.
Yeah,
so there
absolutely.
is
And actually,
like
Nick,
you could do that stuff as
that is exactly the intention, is to have the ghost.
Cool,
have the ghost leave the room, put noise canceling headphones on if you want, because then when they come back, they become solely reliant on the recap that gets provided to them by the mutuals. And kind of the fun here is that it creates this additional layer of misunderstanding. Yeah. Right? Because in a real first date, obviously both parties would know exactly what happened because they were there. But here to kind of gamify that and to lean in to this desire to have misunderstanding, because that's where the fun of the story is the ghost is definitely encouraged to not even take part in the first scene at all. Disappear into another room, go outside, whatever. Do whatever you got to do so that when you come back, you can kind of really lean in to those potentially problematic scenarios that happened where, like, you know, you really have to rely on the mutuals as this imperfect narrator of what's going on.
Yeah, a game that it really reminds me of is Inhuman Conditions. Have you ever played?
No, I haven't.
That game. So it's a really great game. And one thing that we were going to talk about earlier, or that we said that we were going to talk about during the episode, was how this is sort of a blend between a TTRPG and like sort of like a small box board game of like being able to play it. And you really don't have to explain a lot of rules. It's like you're playing immediately. That is very much like Inhuman Conditions as well, where it's essentially the Blade Runner robot test to like see if you're a robot or not. And essentially the person who's being interviewed picks up a card and it either says robot, violent robot, or human. And then the other person doesn't see that card and essentially then starts the test and has these cards that they can ask questions from based on like certain kind of genres of questions. Very cool. And there's like kind of the gamification of, you know, on the card, if you're a violent robot, you have certain tasks to get done. And once you get all of them done and put your hands on the table, it means you've essentially killed the interviewer and you like escape.
That's funny.
And if you're just a normal robot, you have like malfunctions that like, if you say the number 2, you have to count to 10 within the next 5 sentences. So it's like you have to do these things that like show that you are a robot and programmed and have these glitches. And then the fun about the game, though, is that as the interviewer, people just have tics and you're like, they've been touching their ear so much. Like, are they a robot? Like, I don't understand what's happening. And that really reminded me of this game too, because it is sort of that thing of like, it's a social kind of experiment game where you're playing off of each other and building sort of a shared story while finding these kind of like the joy of discovery throughout. But going to the point from earlier, like the gamification of it. So you have a couple of things like decision-making mechanics. And I kind of wanted to talk to you a little bit about how you landed on the ones you did and like what kind of feeling you wanted them to bring into the game. Like you said, they're very simple. Coin flips. There's like a way that you can choose your profession and jobs and like your kind of attitudes and stuff. So like very quick character generative stuff. Yeah, why did you put the certain ones you did in, and like why did you choose to gamify those aspects of it, I guess?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I mean, that game, The Human Condition, sounds super cool. I'm gonna have to
It's
check
great.
it out.
You should play it.
It sounds really fun. And just to really quickly, before I get to those gamified elements, I do want to talk a little bit about, like you said, this like blend between board game, card game, role playing game, and I think it's kind of funny how we create these categories as hobbyists in this space. You know, I consider myself to be a big board game player, a big card game player, and a big role playing game player. And sometimes I feel like there are some quote unquote board games that feel more like role playing games than they sell themselves on, and vice versa. Right? There are some role playing games that, at the end of the day, could very well be like a war miniature game as opposed to being a role
skirmish game or whatever.
Yeah, totally. So I kind of didn't really think about what box this would fit in when I was creating it. I just kind of had this idea. I had this desire to make something, and you know, at first I felt this almost like this obligation to include dice. I was like, if it's a role-playing game, I have to have dice. I have to have like a random table or something. And the very first iteration of the game actually had you roll dice to pick your character. It had you roll dice to kind of pick those character traits that you were talking about, Nick. Yeah. And then it also had you roll dice at the end of the game to kind of help dictate whether or not a second date was going to happen, whether or not your character had kind of like quote unquote misbehaved and done something to hurt the feelings of the other person.
Yeah.
But then the more I kind of edited the document and tried, you know, a few little solo playtests by myself to see if it kind of worked out, it just felt forced. It felt like, because I was trying to make a role-playing game, I was including these elements. So instead, I kind of pared it back, and I was like, you know what? If people are here to tell a story, they're probably going to want to tell a story about a character that they care about. So why not give them the flexibility to make any kind of personality, any kind of character that they want? Of course, the game has some examples that you can kind of use as inspiration if you'd like, but at the end of the day, if you're going to sit down with your friends to pretend to date one another, you want to be as comfortable as you can. And part of that is playing or portraying a character that you feel comfortable playing. So I took away the dice rolls there. And then at the very end with the kind of setting the kind of final state of the game, I mean, I really, really wanted a random thing to decide that for you. Because, again, going back to a common problem in GM-less games is that without somebody in the driver's seat, sometimes you can get misunderstandings about where you're trying to go. And I mean, it happens even in games with the game master, where different players might be role-playing something and they have a hard time kind of closing it out.
Yeah.
So I still wanted it to be decided by chance or by kind of like this external force. And it was actually my wife who was like, just why not flip a coin? Yeah. Like flip a coin and see what happens. And I was like, that's perfect. Everybody has a coin too, right?
And it's yes, no. It's great.
It's yes, no. There's a couple of coin flips that mean different things in the game. And now you don't really need anything to play, because once you've read the rules once or twice, you've tried it once or twice, it's a very, very straightforward game to just pick up and play at a campfire, or when you're having some beers with friends at, you know, outside in the backyard or what have you. So removing those additional, like, quote unquote requirements to play just makes it an easier game to get out and give it a try.
Yeah, and it also was, it really struck me like a problem I have with TTRPGs is that for a person like my fiance who it just like generally hates games with lots of rules, like this is kind of like the perfect sort of party TTRPG where you can sit down with a group of friends, immediately start playing, and it's something that I'm excited to try with her because I think that she will enjoy this sort of thing, and also as an improviser, this has sort of all of the good bits of like a short form game or like a small format for like long form. So I was excited to see that stuff in there too. And I was also pleased, like you said, like the randomization of certain moments is actually very important, because without them, there are like, you're just telling a story together, you know what I mean? And that's fun and great, but it also isn't like a TTRPG or whatever you want to categorize it as. One of my players is a theater creator professionally, and she was like, yeah, the thing I love about D&D is that like we get to sit around, but ultimately the choice of the story is taken out of our hands and we roll dice to decide what happens. And in this way, you still maintain that sort of integral part of a game where you are not really in control of everything. You are making the best of whatever happens.
That's it. Yeah, you're making the best out of what the coin flips kind of tell you. Another part too that I felt really important to add into the game were those cue cards. So we didn't talk about it too much so far, but
yeah, why don't we run through it?
Yeah, so there's a mechanic in the game where the ghost actually, as they're gone, they get to write down action cards. I call them action cards, but really they're, you know, like a short 3-word sentence, 2-word sentence that explains an action. For instance, get mad, or be forgiving, or laugh real hard, something like that. And so the ghost, while they're gone, they're going to write out a handful of these action cards, and then when they come back to the game, they give it to the mutuals. And now the mutuals have this joyful power of giving those action cards to people as whether it be the initiator or the ghost, as they continue to play the game, to kind of throw this curveball, to kind of, like you said, it's not quite random at this point. It's actually very intentional, but it's fun to be that person giving it to your friend when, you know, they were going one direction with what they were saying, and then you give them this action card that they have to implement, like basically right away, as soon as they physically possibly can, into the narrative of what's going on. So it can really throw a curveball. And it's fun, like you said, to adapt, try to pivot the story in a different direction because you've been given this card. Throw in the coin flips too that dictate that you have to go on a second date or you don't go on a second date.
Yeah.
But you just got a card that says like, be enamored by the other person. And you're like, okay, how am I going to be enamored, but also like not agree to go on another date after?
Yeah, it's I love you too much. I can't do it to myself.
Exactly.
It's so interesting that you brought up 10 Candles, because now after hearing that as an inspiration, I'm like, oh yeah. I see, especially with that mechanic where some of the inspiration comes from. So, and I really enjoy that kind of thing too, because it gives, you know, the power roles, I'm using kind of like air quotes, are the initiator and the ghost, because those are the people who the action is revolving around. But you've done a really good and fun thing where you've taken the ensemble characters, which are the mutual friends, and you've actually given them mechanical power over the other two. And so I think that in a way kind of balances out their narrative importance, because then you have people who are really invested in, you know, the primary two people's stories, and then also thinking like, how am I going to add my twist onto this with these mechanics? And that way you're still like involving everyone in like a very major way, which is really, really cool.
Yeah, awesome. No, I'm glad you noticed the parallel a little bit. I mean, of course, this isn't a horror game. There's no, there's none of that. It's very much a comedic game, a game about romance. And actually, Nick, if you don't mind, I might want to talk quickly about romance in the tabletop.
Please do, because this is something that we talked about recently on Tabletopped, about like how to incorporate romance into games, because especially in TTRPGs, there's always this like thing of like you said earlier, it's like flirting with your friends. Like these are people who you're sitting down to play a game with, and it's like, oh, are we going out, I guess? So like, totally. Tell me a little bit about your thoughts on this and like why this was kind of the thing you wanted to gamify. Yeah,
well, I think romance is sometimes a touchy subject in the TTRPG space. You know, it a lot of the elements of like a lines and veils safety tool, it revolve around people's level of comfort dealing with intimacy in a role-playing game. And you know what? Like, I'm super here for it. Like, these tools are made to be used so that everyone feels comfortable at the table. And so when I created First Aid Update, this was something that was really in the forefront for me. Like, how do I make a game about romance that is still accessible to people who might feel uncomfortable doing romantic things in a role-playing game? It was something that I found really like an interesting challenge for myself. And so before I talk about what I did in the game, I'd like to talk about why I think people should try to incorporate romance more in the role-playing games. And this is no longer about First Date Update, but I find that romance, like when you think about the tenets of romance, it usually involves things like character growth, emotional growth, going through dramatic moments and sharing dramatic moments with other people. It usually involves this kind of vulnerability that people kind of will live through, and then by being vulnerable, they kind of open themselves up to those kind of emotions. So when you think of those tenets of romance, there's kind of a parallel between like an adventuring party.
Yeah.
A character that goes on an adventure will experience character growth. They will experience moments of trauma. They will experience moments of vulnerability, and sharing those moments with other people, aka the other members of their party or NPCs or what have you, it kind of makes it very ripe for romance. And when we talk about romance, I don't think we need to necessarily be like the big R romance, people going into the bedroom and doing the nasty and all that stuff. Like, it doesn't have to be that. Romance can just be sharing an intimate glance when you're sitting down at the fire, cooking your meal, and patting someone on the back and looking them deep in the eyes and say, thank you, you had my back in that fight. Like, romance can be more subtle, I think. And I think it would be good for people to try to embrace it in a comfortable way, because we can tell really cool stories if we use romance in conjunction with everything else.
I totally agree. I feel, and this is a slight tangent, but I think it is all related in the end. So I think it's worth talking about. But like, I talked about it on a previous episode, but in one of my longer term games, I did actually have like a romantic subplot for one of the characters where they were playing a college aged woman, and she was sort of coming into herself and her own. And there were these two other NPCs that they had kind of created in their backstory. And there was sort of this implied romantic triangle between her, Kosuke, who is sort of like this nerd in the anime club with her, and also Claude, who was sort of like this jerk artist. And it was sort of like, it kind of reflected in the end kind of her character growth as well, of like, am I going to do maybe the more powerful fun thing, which is kind of to be an asshole and to go with this other person, but she was a cursed person and had these like sort of jinx like powers. And so it's like, do I use those for fun and games, or do I have this sort of like sweet sort of, become a person who cares about other people and wants to be cared about in return? And so like you said, it really mirrors like the story of a character's growth and can be a really great reflection of that. And so I agree, having romance in your games is fun. And I also agree that like the doing the nasty thing is like such a non-part of that.
Yeah,
like
the
you don't
fun
have to
of
make
romance is the like build up, the will they, won't they, love triangles. Like, oh, that's where the fun storytelling is, not at the end when they get together. Forget about it. That's the boring stuff.
Yeah. And but there's actually kind of a fun sort of way that you can weave it into your game as well, because you have like sort of a secret mode or an extra mode, which is the double date, which is also great.
Yeah, the double date is kind of fun. That one is still... I'm still debating, actually. In the version I gave you, Nick, there aren't really very elaborate rules for the double date, and I'm still on the fence about whether or not I should add a couple extra pages to flesh that out more. But,
I think you should. It's such a good idea.
It's definitely something that I think I might do. But I think to go back to your original question from I don't know 15 minutes ago now, in First Date Update, I was trying to be very conscious of this these limitations that people have with romance in their games, these kind of barriers that they set up to protect their own safety, which 100% do. Like, I want people to do. Yeah. And so when I made the game, I tried to think of ways to make romance less on front and center of an element of the less kind of I don't know if I'm making sense. Like not so in your face. It's not, in the Lions and Veils, it's maybe closer to the yellow than the red as far as, you're not doing it off scene, but you're not doing it in full role play.
Yeah.
And some of the ways that I tried to do that was first and foremost to talk about the date in the past. Mm-hmm. When you talk about something that has happened as opposed to something that is happening, it's a little bit easier. Like it's not, you're not role playing out this kind
of built-in barrier. Yeah.
Yeah. There's a built-in barrier. So the flirtatious moment, I mean, you can still have it if you want to have it. People listening are like, I want to flirt with my friends. Let's go. Go ahead. But you don't have to. You can just talk about the good date that you had and wish there was another one. And you don't even have to get into any of the kind of more mushy romantic stuff. And then another component that I tried to incorporate was the mutuals. Having this third party be present, you never have the ghost and the initiator alone.
Yeah.
At any moment in the game. So by having this third party there, it kind of automatically generates this more PG kind of component of the game and enables you to still tell stories that brush up against those things if you want them to. But it's just as easy and fun to tell a story that doesn't. So those are kind of the two elements that I incorporated into the game to try to make it still about romance, but without being romantic necessarily, Right.
Because because you also have built into it in the descriptions and everything as well around sort of like your characters have points of view. So they're like the initiator could have this sort of like, I saw your eyes under the stars and reflected in them, I saw the universe that our lives could be together. And the other person would be like, you were so smelly. Like, you were so gross, dude. And like, that's also part of it. Like, you can just that difference is also kind of part of it, which I think is really fun, where you can sort of kind of gauge each other's comfort level by how they decide to take the outlook. Like you could play this game as sort of like what went wrong. It's like, it's just not the right time. My husband died recently and this came up and it's like this whole thing. Or it could be, super silly.
Bad. Totally.
Yeah, you smell bad. I think that you should take a shower, that maybe we give it another shot. So it's kind of all in there, and you're able to self-regulate because it like you said in romantic situations, it kind of takes two to tango to have like those kind of more vulnerable moments. Mm-hmm. And if either of the parties that are in this relationship decide that they want it to be more of a silly, like, nope, this is just silly, you smell, I don't like you, whatever, like that can happen at any time. You know what I mean? And so you can, like, the safety tools in a kind of weird way are kind of built in, because you can always just have your character just not agree.
Yeah, exactly. It's kind of fun that way. And I like how you talked about humor as kind of like this escape hatch, right? Like it's definitely that and I think everybody does it all the time in real life. Yeah. When you're in a meeting at work or you're talking to somebody about something uncomfortable, humor is a really easy way to kind of reel it back in and kind of dissolve that discomfort. So I tried to lean into that in the game. Like, this is supposed to be a silly game about going on a silly first date. You can make it as far to one end or as far to the other end as you'd like, and both work. And yeah, I forget where I was going with that, but
no, I mean, that's a complete thought. I would love to talk about the mutuals a little bit more. So in this, you have these two people who are making these big decisions about sort of shared history. It's sort of a very yes and from both of them. How did you sort of like come up with the mutuals and like their role in the whole game? So you were talking a little bit about them being present so that it would allow people to feel safer in the game and not feel like, I'm in a really intense acting scene or whatever. But like, how do you think about the mutuals, and how did you sort of come up with their role and how that they were implemented into the game?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, it's a little bit of different. There's a couple of different reasons. One of them was that I didn't want a game for just 2 people. Like, I'll be honest, I wanted it to be a game that could incorporate a kind of a range of players, and the game can be played with 3 players, just as it can be played with, I think, up to 6 players. I mean, 6 is starting to get a little bit too much, I think. I would say if you have more than 3 mutuals, that variant of going on a double date becomes kind of the better way to do it. But so that was kind of the first reason, was I wanted the game to be available to kind of like a group of people. Mm-hmm. Secondly, like I kind of mentioned, I wanted this mutual to kind of help exaggerate some of the things that got said to kind of push the agenda of misunderstanding. Yeah. So you've got the first scene happens. They're kind of talking to their friend about what went wrong, what they think went wrong, how the date went, etc. And then by making the mutuals the people who are responsible for recapping the narrative, mm-hmm. they get the control of what they get to recap and what things they get to fixate on. And even in the rules, I say, you can maybe tell a little lie. Like you can stretch the truth a little bit, because it's the misunderstandings that make it fun. Yeah. So I love this idea of a character in the game who is quite literally just like the snoopy, nosy neighbor friend who like just wants to spill the tea. Like that's their objective, is let's just find out the gossip, and if I burn a bridge to get it, who cares? Like, it's kind of like this silly character. And I mean, maybe that comes from like a deep-seated desire for me to do that, and I don't have.
At the beginning, you were like, "Oh man, this is like all of these friends who go on these adventures. I want to know about it.
I want to know. Tell me all the details." So yeah, I think maybe there's. I'd be lying if there wasn't a little bit of that. Like, that's kind of the fun part, but. Yeah, I think it kind of helps to balance it out, helps to kind of control the narrative a little bit. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's most of the reason. I'm sure there's other stuff if I kept thinking about it, but that's kind of the bulk of it.
All right, let's talk a little bit about the kind of meat and potatoes of one of the reasons why we're talking about this. It's being published. It's coming out. It's towards August, correct? And I kind of want to get a sense of like what your plan for this is, how people can get in touch to like get their hands on it. Essentially, what is your hope for the game? So why don't you tell a little bit about that as well, as we kind of come to the third act of our little podcast here.
Yeah, well, so First Date Update is being self-published by me. I wrote the whole thing on my own. I found a great printing company up here in Canada who's I'm working with to get the game printed. And my hope is to release the game in August of this summer, so 2025, August 2025, and further to be digital versions of the game and physical versions of the game for purchase. This is my first, this is my maiden voyage in creating tabletop role-playing games, so there might be a little bit of speed bumps, but, I've created an itch page for my quote-unquote publishing house that I'm calling it RPC Press. So I've created an itch page, and I'm going to have the game there. I'm going to put the game probably on like Drive-Thru-RPG as well, and some of the other digital role-playing game kind of shops that you can find. And then to get the game physically, I'm thinking of having a website for myself that people can come to and buy the game, and then I'll ship it to them, snail mail style. And then I'm hoping to get it in the hands of some vendors at, a variety of conventions across kind of Canada, the US, and maybe the UK or Europe. I'm not sure. All the logistics still haven't fully been sorted out.
Sure.
But I just love the idea of having like a physical game. It's just so much better. It's so much. I'm a very tactile person, so being able to put it up on a shelf and having it there, there's kind of like a little box that gets checked off in my head if I say that I've been able to make a physical version of it.
Right.
But so August will be when it comes out. I'm chatting to you and a few other friends that I have in the space about the game. So I'm hopeful that this will kind of drum up a little bit of hype for people listening. And then of course I'm always on socials too. So if you can't figure out how to get it and you want to get it, come find me and we'll make it happen.
Yeah, and I'll make sure that the itch page and any other links that you have kind of live right now, like your socials and stuff, will be in the show notes. So if you are listening to this right now, and either it is when this comes out, which will probably be late June, or if you are in August listening to old episodes and you're like, oh, like I'm interested in this, head to the show notes. The links will be there, and it can pop over and see some of Matt's work. But also, Matt, in general, as somebody who has now stepped into the design world, I always ask people who come on sort of what would you recommend for people who are maybe interested in creating a game of their own or anything like that. What is your sort of, your learnings as you step your toes into that space? Anything that you would recommend or not recommend for folks that are interested in sort of getting into this sort of field as well?
I mean, that's a really good question, and I'm not sure I'm fully done.
Okay,
the game,
you're still in the process.
I'm still in the process, but the game is almost done, and I'm at the kind of final stages. So I definitely think I can say, like, don't be afraid to ask questions. Mm-hmm. I think is the big one. I also think it's helpful to find communities of creators. There's a couple of really good ones that exist. There's one which is the Rising Tide TTRPG Discord community. That's a community that I'm very active in. I'm kind of their quote unquote host whenever we interview people. I do that I volunteer my time to do that. But, it's a very supportive group of people who are in some way, shape or form, like associated to the TTRPG creative community. And so finding your way into one of those communities and not being shy to ask questions, that got me really far along in this, like, oh, what should I use for layout, or where should I go to get printing stuff like proofs done and right. Stuff like kind of the like logistics, quote unquote logistics. And so far, knock on wood, I have not engaged with somebody in the TTRPG space who hasn't been, at least willing to give me some kind of answer that would be helpful. Everyone is so kind and generous with their time. So I think if you have an idea, put pen to paper, sit down in a basic word processing software and just type away, get it out, and then ask questions. I mean, feel free to come ask me questions. I'd be happy to tell you what I did, and maybe it'll work for you and maybe not. I don't know. But definitely don't hesitate to kind of reach out, send a DM. Be polite about it. Don't be like, hey.
Hey, jackass.
Help
me with my project.
Yeah.
And Matt, there's also another way, which is to listen to your amazing podcast, Roleplay Chat. Can you tell the folks a little bit about what Roleplay Chat is? We've had you on enough that I think our core audience probably already knows you, but for the new folks, what is Roleplay Chat? What do you talk about, and where can they find you?
Absolutely. Thanks, Nick. Yeah, so Roleplay Chat is my first creation in the TTRPG space, and it's a tabletop discussion podcast. If you like conversations like the one that you're listening to here, you will almost certainly love Roleplay Chat as well. So it's available wherever you listen to podcasts, on YouTube as well. And on socials, I'm roll_play_chat. That's roll spelt ROLE as in roleplay. So come find me there, and you can shoot me a DM if you have questions about, the creative process or things like that.
Well, Matt, it's always a pleasure talking to you. I'm super excited to get the final version of First Date Update, but I will also probably be playing the beta or alpha version you sent me with some friends just to give it a shot. It sounds like it's such a blast. Awesome. I personally would recommend this for people who are interested in trying to get people who may not be interested in sitting down and learning like a D&D or a Pathfinder or creating like a really complex system that they have to figure out. Maybe start them off with this one, because it like Matt said, the mechanics are super simple, and you're going to have a good time, I think. So thanks for coming on. And everyone, if you're interested in more conversations like this, Tabletopped is doing only a 2-episode per month in this summer, but we're gonna be continuing to release every other Monday. Please, if you want to get in touch with us, do tabletoppodcast at gmail.com, or you can go to our Patreon, patreon.com/tabletopped. We have some goodies there as well, including extra bonus episodes to get you through the lean months of summer as we're taking our little break. Matt, again, is a pleasure. And everyone, we'll see you next time. Goodbye.
Bye. Thanks.